Welcome to SpacePod. Well, in these uncertain times, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, the world of space, or more accurately workspace, is going through change. So SpacePod's a chance to grab some time from professionals across the industry, partners, colleagues, customers and thought leaders to share their personal views of the change events going on around us. Let's get started. Welcome to SpacePod, a place for like-minded people to pop along, have a chat and share their views on the impact on space. My name is Paul Russell, I work for IBM, and I'm curious about how the space around us helps a human being have a better day. I'm joined today with my great pal at IBM, Paul Gatlin, who is part of the team helping customers solve space challenges through software. Welcome, Paul G.
Hello, Paul.
Thanks, Paul. And I'm also joined by a great customer friend, Gabe Barrett, CIO at Abellio Group. Hi, Gabe. It's great to have you on SpacePod.
Hi, Paul. Great to be here.
This podcast is entirely a personal point of view. It's not representative of our respective organizations' strategies. Gabe, start by asking you where you are right now, and can you also tell us a little bit about your role?
So I'm at home, as we all are, working from the couch at the moment and occasionally spicing it up a bit by working in the kitchen. My job at Abellio is I'm the Chief Information Officer of the Abellio Group, which has a number of travel businesses below us, 5 train companies and a bus company, looking at our use of technology and how we make our customers' journey easier every day.
Great the way you describe that, because when I think of space, I tend to defer to space being office or an airport terminal. Getting people from A to B is what you do. Staggering arrival times into buildings in some of the large cities might be a thing of the future. So it'd be great to hear your perspective.
That's a great question, Paul. And our concept of space is similar. We, like all organizations, have some office space, but we also have station spaces, and then we have the space on the train itself. And space, of course, is a concept that everybody has become intimately familiar with over the last number of weeks. I think we're a generation of people who will be able to estimate 6 feet or 2 meters by eye with ease in the future. So the idea of moving from where we are at the moment as an industry, which is we're running at roughly 50% of our normal capacity, to carry less than 5% of our normal customers. So we've massively increased the amount of space available to individuals on those trains. So as we move to some level of easing of the restrictions and easing of the lockdown, it's obvious that there's going to be an increase in the number of people looking to move on public transport, whether that's bus, train, light rail. And there's got to be, I think, a really deep discussion about how we're going to manage that space around that person. So in order to keep those numbers low, to have that kind of space around people within a train, there's going to have to be some thought given to how people are moving in and out of cities. But this is also very much diversified, I would say, by geography as well. I think the biggest risk is actually that public transport won't be the method of choice people use. People use cars or that they walk or they cycle. Walking and cycling is great. It's a great environment, great for health. But if we have now a generation of people moving off trains and into cars, that's really not a good place for us to be going as an economy and as an environment.
And you talked about this kind of bubble of space onto the train, onto the bus, or parking the car into the office. So I think that as a context is going to be really interesting to see how we manage that from not just technology but society and policies. So Paul, I know you wanted to follow up with Gabe.
Thanks, Paul. So Gabe, given the speed of change right now, are there any unintended consequences in your industry that you've seen appear, for good or for bad?
I wouldn't say it's necessarily an unintended consequence, but there's an awful lot of public transport that's moving around fresh air. There's a lot of buses traveling empty or very empty. There are a lot of trains traveling empty. In order to keep those routes for key workers open, how we're using all those resources and making sure that we don't move to much more resource-intensive ways of moving people. As I was saying earlier, if people start moving back to cars from trains or other forms of public transport, has a really negative effect for the environment.
Another great example of space that potentially is emptier now. And as you were talking again, I was thinking about how the smartphone will have a role in, getting back to normal. And And I just wondered, have you got a point of view on that?
Absolutely. I think our customers are certainly very, very happy to use smartphone technology. But for me, this isn't an industry question at all. This is a societal question. Is the degree to which people are willing to give up some aspect of individual privacy for an amount of collective good. And this one is going to be fascinating to see implementing these types of apps and seeing the adoption rates and how people use them. I think is going to be very interesting. And I think it will be quite different. So where you have cultures with very strong senses of individuality and of privacy and of resistance to government oversight, I think you'll see a very low uptake of apps like this. Those might be societies which normally would take up technology at a high degree, where you may also find societies that have a much higher tolerance for government oversight or intrusion, depending on how you look at it. You might see a much higher take-up. What people aren't concerned about are the transient encounters. So it's not so much about the 13 people you walked past on the high street. It's the one person that you sat next to on your journey to work. It's those close and in some cases extended contact. They're people that you spend generally a fair amount of time with. So you probably know them at some personal degree. Whereas on the train, especially again, if we look in London, almost completely anonymous spaces. So you get the same train to work every day for 5 years, and somebody else gets the same train to work every day for 5 years, and you would never know, but you might be in that close contact with them. But it definitely does involve trusting the system. And it will be interesting to see how many people actually do trust the systems.
Again, fascinating, that whole use of technology, smartphone contact tracking, and then the physical proximity of people, especially in some of the bigger cities like London. Paul, I know you're desperate to understand a little bit more around like buildings, infrastructure. Do you want to go next?
No, thanks, Paul. Just to quickly go back to the previous point Gabe mentioned. I mean, it just reminded me. So whenever I travel into London, I will go to the same point on the platform. I will generally sit in the same area of the train. I will see the same people. So no, you're absolutely right. Moving on to talk around sort of buildings. So from that perspective, perhaps more around the stations and the barriers and like the overall ingress points, I'm assuming they're under review when we look at different access methods, and just wondered if you had any thoughts around that.
There's three. So you've got office spaces, which are quite static. In two respects, the office itself doesn't move, and then the people within them are generally the same people day to day. But then when you look at our train, even though the trains move, there's quite static spaces. There's not a huge amount of movement in and out of the train once it's going. The stations, however, are incredibly dynamic spaces. So if you look at a station like Waterloo, which is one of ours, Waterloo Station North has 125,000 people going through it during a day, and it's managing that movement within the station. That's going to be, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we need to manage, again, to both keep people safe. It's more about managing that movement of people within a space. And like all systems, though, if you step back to a certain degree, you see patterns in that movement. It's not random. It's not chaotic. Somebody standing at the same point on the platform every day to get into the same section of the train like you do. This is really common because you know the best place to stand for either to get a seat or to be in the right place when you get off at your station at the other end. So they're very definitive patterns. And also we're quite used to dealing with, and so when you have an event, a sporting event or a cultural event, and you have a huge increase number going through a station, actually some of that thinking could be quite similar, because you're trying to manage not the huge number of people, but with much more space around them. So it's, again, if we go back to that concept of the bubble, that person is now taking more space. So where before you might have had, I don't know, 16 people, you can physically fit maybe 16 people in a 2 meter square space, and that's one person taking up that space. So it's kind of similar when you think about it. Large numbers of people have a similar way of putting people through the space, small number of people, but each of them taking up a larger degree.
Gabe, you talked that kind of space and the dimensions and the behavioural change. And Paul, your example, like you see a lot of people have that sort of modus of where they stand and where they sit on the train. That's going to probably change a lot for people. Gabe, as we're talking, I was thinking about data, and this is probably our last question, but everything we talk about is probably a lot more data that needs to get collected and analyzed and, and insight driven from. So Do you think there's a role of either new data or data, refresh in our route back to normal?
I'm not sure it's necessarily new data as it is deriving new insights from existing data sets. So there are full data sets about how people move through space, whether that's TomTom releasing their congestion index about cities and being able to see how traffic has dropped through cities. We've even got Google tracking Android devices. So I don't think it's necessarily about new data. I think it's about asking new questions of that data, having it help guide us through new way of thinking about. And that's going to be, I think, a key part of how we move back to, well, we're never moving back, right? So you never go back to the old working. What we're going to is we're moving forward to a new normal. And that new normal is going to impact everybody's life and in aspects of life, how they travel, how they work, where they go, who they see and how they see them. Whereas people before were going to pubs and restaurants, now you've got the virtual parties taking place through your chosen communication method of choice. Lots of communication methods are available. And data really needs to help guide what that new normal is going to be, as well as actually us understanding it as it evolves. So this isn't going to be, I think, hugely deterministic. It's not like we can sit down and design a new normal. That's not how human societies work. They're emergent. They'll emerge from the new patterns of behavior that people adjust to. So back to our station platform, whereas every congregated around the points where the doors would always open on the trains. Well, they started cheating when they started painting Mind the Gap at the exact spot where the train door would open. So you had people congregating around those. I think so you'll see people distributing themselves more evenly down that point to have that bubble of space around them. We understand how this data is real time now. So from a planning perspective, we can understand as behavior is changing.
Gabe, I want to say a big thank you to you for your time. And Paul, my fellow IBMer, I really appreciate your time as well. And so, guys, I just want to wish you, a safe rest of your day. To the listeners, if you like SpacePod, please tell others. And if you want to join Paul and I on a future cast, please reach out to me via LinkedIn. You've been listening to SpacePod. Please stay safe.